So my name is Scott Love. I'm one of the owners of New Millennium Communications, and we're primarily a custom FileMaker development shop, just like you guys. But we also sell, just like you guys, just like many of you guys. But we also sell a suite of products called Genesis that is tailored for accounting and finance and business analytics. So the theory is it's a best of both worlds. You can buy Genesis and get a robust accounting solution and then customize from there. And along the way, I have been hiring and recruiting and managing folks since my early 20s. I just, for whatever reason, I landed in a job that required that I bring in another person, and that worked out, and on I've gone. So in some form or another, I feel like I've always been looking for good talent and trying to assess folks and so forth. And this is meant to be a bit of a provocative statement, though it seems commonsensical to me, which is that recruiting is the most important thing I do as a business owner and a business leader. And yeah, I get it. You know, you've got sales and you've got to figure out this, I don't know, I hear that FileMaker development is an important skill one should have. But in my view, and I get it, right? So if you don't have developers working and good folks building good products, if you're a product company or what have you, and your sales guys aren't doing their jobs, then there's no recruiting. But the trick here is twofold. I'd make two real quick points philosophically. That recruiting is about building a team and getting a group of people together that spend most of their lives together, as it turns out. And that's important. I want to work with people I like. Two of them are right here. Hi, guys. And so recruiting people that click and fit and are a good part of the team is a big part of it. And then consider also lead time. So generally speaking, it takes me about 2 months, a little bit more sometimes, from an initial job posting, I've opened up a position, to the point at which the person is in their seat or just doing work. Because it takes time to learn and to train, right? So you need to ramp up. And so the point at which you're like, I need somebody, you're months away from having someone. And so for that reason, I think recruiting is absolutely a critical piece of the puzzle. And again, I think leading a team and growing a team is long-term what I do best as a contributor to the group with whom I work. And there's a cost of getting it wrong. So here, again, a little bit more evangelism about why recruiting is important and why you good, sensible people have chosen to come to this session this morning as opposed to learning about, I don't know, APIs or what have you. There's a cost to getting it wrong. The Zappos CEO famously, a number of years ago, when he hired folks at Zappos, he would literally put a bonus out there and say, okay, if you quit your job, I will pay you this bonus. And essentially, he would dare people to leave their jobs. Now, I'm thinking, be careful what you wish for. I don't know. I'm not sure I have the courage to go that far with this, but I think it's a really strong statement about how important it is, again, to get the right fit. It's not about quantity. It's not about, you know, just grabbing however many candidates you can and shoving them through a process. It's really about ferreting out who are those right fits in life. And the cost to getting it wrong is not just purely financial. The Labor Department statistic here is interesting as well. The cost to getting it wrong, it's, you know, sure, there's a financial cost. There's a managerial cost. You know, I think I'm an amazing manager, right? And I'm sure Therese and Aaron here would very happily agree with me. But, you know, I always have this hubris where it's like someone's not quite a right fit, and I think, oh, I can manage my way through this. We'll tailor the position a little differently. We'll spec different. Anyway, the rest of the team is sitting there watching this, and we're thinking, gosh, you're expending all this energy on a low performer trying to turn that person into a mediocre performer. That's bad. That costs, it's sand in the engine, and we're busy, you know, the FileMaker community at large is growing, the economy is strong, we don't have time for sand in the engine. So there's a cost to it. And then, most importantly, there's a cost to the individual. I have been in positions in my life where I have not been a good fit for a job, and it's just soul crushing. And I don't want to do that to other people. So there you go. So don't do that to people. Be nice and find the right fit and have a good recruiting process that supports your effort to figure out, again, should we metaphorically get married? Should we choose to work together? And You know, as we all know, we spend most of our time at work and most of our time interacting with our colleagues, so let's choose wisely. We spend all this energy deciding who we want to date and who we want to get married to. Well, let's spend some energy choosing whom we want to work with as well. So today I'm going to give you a blueprint, and I really want to stress this is my blueprint, and I'm hoping that in giving you a very specific breakdown of how I approach recruiting, this will help you take some tidbits away and adapt the thoughts here to your own recruiting process. And you know, sure, if you want to adapt it wholesale, that's great. But I'm going to be really specific and really prescriptive. And some of the things will be like, that's going to take too much time, or that's not the way I do things. That's fine. I'm hoping to give you some food for thought today. These are the topics we'll run through. We'll start with what are the requirements of a position, and we'll go all the way through to onboarding. So it'll be fairly high level. I also want to encourage you as we go, if you've got questions, grab a mic. And I hate talks where it's like, I've got a question, and then 30 minutes later you have to remember what the speaker was rambling on about. So hop up to the mic. We are recording the session, so please use the mic and ask a question, and I'll manage our time as best I can. You're going to be surprised to hear that as a software developer, I think that one should start with requirements. Radical thought, right? So one of the problems in life is that we don't know what we want often in life. When approaching a new position, I like to think about, okay, well, what's going to make the most sense? And what are the things that are must-haves? What are the things that are nice-to-haves? And these are rhetorical questions on some level because it's usually both, right? You want someone cheap and awesome. That's a great requirement. Or you're looking for someone who can both manage and do. Or you're looking for someone who can come in and is sort of a raw clay kind of candidate and hasn't developed many of those bad habits or good habits, and you want to craft them into the kind of fit for your organization. Or you also want someone who's super experienced and has done it 200 times and twice on Tuesday and can teach you how to do it. These are things to consider as you flesh out, okay, I need a developer. Well, what kind of developer? Experience. What about compensation? You've got to think about that too. As a business leader, if you don't have a budget for a position, you need to have a budget. And then when we talk about requirements, I really want to stress that. So I'm an airport bookstore junkie. I'll go into first it's the sci-fi section because, you know, I'm a nerd. And then the second section I go to is the business section. And there are all these great books that'll be like, oh, if I buy this book, I'm going to be a great company leader. Awesome. And I, you know, feverishly read it. And I give whoever wrote it, you know, their 6 cents or whatever of royalty. And I don't know, I hope I'm a better person for it. One of the favorite quotes from these sort of how do you run business books that I've come across in the days, Peter Drucker's, and he's been around forever. I'm sure you've heard of him. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. I love that quote, and I couldn't agree more strongly. And I think that the subsequent you know, thoughts in our business world that have come since have been derivative in some degree to this. When I think about recruiting, I really do think about the raw material of a person. What is their intelligence? What are their talents? And I can train for skills. Another axiom in the recruiting world is to hire for attitude and train for skill. And I completely agree with that too. We can bring someone up to speed fairly quickly, and yes, you need a baseline. And there are some positions out there that are very scientific and require lots of background. We have a client who is doing hardcore literal rocket science. And so he hires PhDs, and he's like, I don't care if they have bad attitudes. I don't care if they don't know how to show up at work, you know, clean shaven or whatever. You know, I just need them to have their credentials. So obviously this isn't a one-size-fits-all thought, but I'd like to encourage you to really think about your values as a business. So what are your requirements for the position? What are your values as a business? Do you want people who are team players who work well together? Do you want folks who are good communicators? Or do you need folks who are super focused on the technology side of things? And what behaviors are you expecting folks to have when they come on board? I break my requirements into 3 sections: culture, skill, and mechanics. And you know, culture, I believe, I could do a whole talk on culture. I get excited about that. And how do you foster a sense of culture? What is it? How do you define it? But we'll save that for the bar later, I suppose. On skills, this is pretty straightforward. Do they have the technical capabilities that they need to do their job? And at what threshold do you think, okay, this person's going to be a fit and be able to come in and contribute in a way that is reasonably in keeping with my expectations as a business? And what does the rest of the team need, particularly? Because you don't want somebody to come in and be a drain on the rest of the team for a while. So you need to set your team's expectations about what skills you're looking for as well as the candidates and your own. Now, mechanics, I put this on the list. It seems kind of dumb to mention, but I'll sort of dive more deeply into why I've put this on the list. But mechanics really are. They're the nuts and bolts of it. When can you start? Do you want to live in Denver, or do you want to work remotely? What compensation do you want, and so forth. Well, I'll get to that in a minute, but it's good to pay attention to that. And some of those data points can filter out candidates pretty quickly in the process. So, process. You're going to hear this word lots in this presentation. The session description that I wrote talked about how do you filter out that gut check process? How do you make sure that you're not just relying on, when I hired a guy a number of years ago at Macromedia, I was still early on in this whole thing, and I remember we had this interview and we started, oh, you play Quake? This is years and years ago, the original Quake. Oh, you play Quake? So we riffed for about 15 minutes about video games, and then we talked a little bit about the stuff that we needed on the team, and I hired the guy on the spot. Now, I got lucky. He's a friend to this day, and it was a great fit, but I totally got lucky. How do you avoid relying on luck? Good process. And you're not gonna get it right all the time. I've made some bad hires. Not recently. I've made some bad hires, and that's going to happen. The idea here is to mitigate the sort of almost randomness or the subjectivity. And you do that by having a structure. That's my whole pitch. You can go to the pool now. Before we get into the process, I also want to talk about an applicant tracking system. If you're not using an ATS, please do. And I don't necessarily shill for one over another. I know that there's some applicant tracking software in the FileMaker world, and they may well be awesome tools, and I'd recommend that you look into them. I happen to use RecruiterBox. I know LinkedIn has an ATS that is extremely popular. I want you to get the concept if you're not familiar with this, so let me just show you real quick what I'm talking about. Here, all right, so this is RecruiterBox. There's a little dashboard that tells me if I've forgotten to do something. I go into an opening. This is one of our actual job openings. Here's the job description, or the job posting rather. I want to be clear, this is a job posting. You can write all that. And then one of the things that an ATS will do for you is it integrates, if it's a good ATS, it integrates with job boards. And so you can go in and manage both paid and free job board postings from a single source. You don't have to go to 12 different websites to post your job. Likewise, the other thing that ATS systems do is they integrate with social media. So you can tweet, you can post on LinkedIn about your job postings. This is a great way to draw in candidates. The other thing that these things do, if they're doing their jobs well, is they allow you to create a structured process by which you assess candidates. And in this case, this is what sold me on an ATS, is it allows me to go in and define different kinds of stages, different processes by which we hire a developer versus project manager or what have you. And when your team members are interviewing folks, you can say, hey, I want you to touch on this topic and this topic and this topic, and you can get your team members' feedback on those topics. There's a structure to it. The thing that an ATS does is it gives you a record of the conversations and the interactions you've had with candidates. And that can be important both because, I don't know about you guys, but I can't remember my shoe size, let alone what I did yesterday or what have you. If you've spoken to somebody and you need to go back in time a year or 6 months or whatever and remind yourself what was going on, you've got a database for that. What a wonderful thing. The other thing an ATS will do, particularly if it's a third-party one and not one that you've built yourself, is it's defensible. If ever you run into, knock on wood, we haven't had any of those issues, and I think it's fairly rare. But if you ever run into any sort of, someone is upset with you for whatever reason, you've got a record and a third-party validated source of what you did with a candidate. So there are some HR concerns that you can take care of in an ATS. All right, so it's time to source candidates. With sourcing candidates, obviously, it's axiomatic. Ask your friends. I mean, if I wanted to hire a FileMaker developer, I would, just as Dave did, I would start in this room, right? And I would talk to the folks whom I know. You know, if I know somebody who knows somebody and they make a recommendation, of course that's going to carry a lot of weight. But here's the problem. The FileMaker community, I'm among friends, yes. We're a little inbred. Let's just own that a little bit, right? So I know you guys, and I don't know, either fortunately or unfortunately, you know me. So our pool of potential candidates is not quite what we want. I really strongly encourage you to broaden your net and use job postings. I have hired some fantastic people right off Indeed, and I know that folks are like, the signal to noise ratio, and you get, you know, if someone's out on Indeed and they don't have a job, then they can't hold a job. There's something wrong with them. No, that's not right at all. If you know, lots of people change their lives and you know, leave jobs and so forth, and I guarantee anyone who leaves a job will spend a weekend on Indeed. It'll just happen. No matter how awesome and talented they are, no matter how plugged into a community they are, they're going to be on job boards looking at job postings. And so use them. The other thing I'd recommend, Brandon Hayes from Kalos Consulting is one of the exhibitors. He's a recruiter who specializes in the FileMaker space. He's a great guy. I reckon, you know, it's funny, recruiters can be a little bit like used car salesmen. You're not quite sure whose agenda is winning out or what have you. Brandon's a really straight up guy. I like him a lot. I've used him for some positions. So I'd recommend him. Check it out. So recruiters, if you haven't worked with one, the way they work is either on contingency, they get a percentage of the asking salary for the first year generally, or there's a fixed fee or what have you. Brandon also does an interesting thing with subcontractors. So there's my pitch for Brandon. I've earned now 2 beers. I want to pitch the 42 program. 42 Silicon Valley, if you don't know, folks at the keynote yesterday talked about 42. This is an extraordinary program. It's a free school. They have a facility in Paris and in Silicon Valley. And they take folks who otherwise don't fit the mold of a 4-year university and offer them a free education. And in some cases, it's because they can't afford it or circumstances in life or what have you. But 42 has this extraordinarily steep requirement for joining the program. You've got to be really smart to join the program. And the other cool thing about the program, this is as an employer standpoint, I love this. The 42 guys are self-taught, self-driven. It's a peer-to-peer teaching system. They don't have traditional structures standing in front of a room like I am blabbing on about stuff. They give their students resources, and they've got a structure in which you sort of, through gamification and so forth, you go through certain levels of curriculum. And at the end, then they can branch out and specialize. And this is where FileMaker came in. The folks at FileMaker said, hey, we will sponsor a certain number of students, which right there in and of itself is awesome. I really love the idea of taking folks who wouldn't otherwise fit the mold and giving them an opportunity and bringing them into the FileMaker community. So the mission of 42 has me sold already. But the quality of the students has been extraordinary. We, this fall, hired 2 folks. This is Erica and Justin on the, let's see, that would be your right. And these guys are really super great people. They come from a coding background. They understand software development. They've had a couple months of intensive FileMaker training, which is more than some candidates I've hired in the past. So, all right, check. And they've just come in and hit the ground running. They're self-directed. They solve problems themselves. They know how to use a web browser to figure things out. I couldn't speak more highly and enthusiastically about the program. I hope FMI continues to grow this program. It's a great way to source candidates. All right, so let's talk about process here. It starts with a job posting. There are some job postings that are good and some job postings that are bad. And you know, it's funny, job postings in some ways, they sort of represent the resumes that then come in as a result of the job posting. A job posting can be really dry, just a bullet list of, you know, name, rank, serial number, you've got to have 3 years of whatever, and you've got to have the following buzzwords on your resume. I hate those job postings. Don't use them. A job posting is a marketing piece. It's a sales piece. And if you're not thinking along those lines, you're in the wrong spot. The job posting isn't about you. It really isn't. Yes, you need to talk about, you know, what your company is and does and what sort of person needs to fit the mold in terms of the position you're looking for. Great. But the job posting is not about you. It's about the candidate. Write it for the candidate. And I'd encourage you to, once you write a job posting, take it to one of your teammates and say, read this, would you apply to this job? And if it's not appealing, if it's not interesting, if it doesn't in any way show how unique you are in a business, then you're in the weeds. You've really got to call out what is special about your business, show some personality. If humor is appropriate for the kind of company you are, great, put some humor in there. If you want to talk about the nonprofit work that you do, awesome, talk about that. Use this as a selling piece. The intent is to draw in candidates. And by the way, you're not trying to draw in any random candidate. You're trying to draw in the good candidates. So write it for them. Don't worry about the folks that are not a fit, because if they self-select out, great, they've done you a favor. Why do people work for your business? If you're struggling with this because you suffer from, as I do, a certain myopia at times, ask your teammates. Why did you join New Millennium? What's special about us? What's the vibe? We happen to be in Colorado. Colorado's awesome. I don't know, I've heard skiing is entertaining. I grew up skiing. So talk about that or what have you. And then skills and requirements, of course you need to do that just so that people kind of understand what they're looking for. All right, so job posting. A job posting, you've thought about it, you've said, okay, I'm going to write it for candidates. And I'm going to inject some personality here. Think of it as a marketing piece. Job applications. Not everyone uses a job application, but I'd advocate strongly for it. Some folks just give an email address and say, hey, yeah, sure, send me your resume. A job application does a couple things. And in my view, you can, some job applications are particularly formal. You've got to fill them out. It takes hours. You've got to, rekey your entire job history. I hate that. Don't inflict that pain and suffering on folks who are looking for a job. Looking for a job is hard. You should make it easy for people. So a job application does two things for a business. One, gives you a record of what they've made claim to when they've submitted their job application and their resume. And so again, from a legal standpoint, it's good to have that check mark. Yes, you told the truth. If you want to do the whole like, hey, have you ever been convicted of a crime or what have you, that's your call. A job application, again, can be formal, informal. Talk to your HR folks or Brandon, who can help with this as well as a consultant, as to what's appropriate. I keep job applications really short. I ask just a few questions. And this is where the second benefit from a job application comes in. I get people to give me some information that isn't boilerplate. A month ago when they left their prior job, they wrote maybe they wrote a cover letter. You're lucky if you get a cover letter these days, but maybe they wrote a boilerplate cover letter and that's it. And then they've got their resume, and if that's all you receive as a hiring manager, that's not quite enough information. You have an opportunity in the job application to ask some questions that are specific to your company and your position. One of the first ones I always ask is, what attracted you to this job posting? And I get some great responses there. The other thing I ask for is a LinkedIn link, but you've got to be careful. Notice I've got equal opportunity employment statement on here. Assuming you buy into it, I think diversity and being mindful of the biases we bring to this process are important to recognize. And in this day and age, we've got access to all kinds of information on candidates. If you ask for a LinkedIn link, which I advocate because it gives you more information, useful information that is publicly out there, you have to recognize that you're going to see a person's photo. And what do you do with that? How do you protect yourself against claims of bias? And how do you protect your own internal thinking against those habits that are ingrained in all of us? Gender, ethnicity, race, etc. You've got to filter that stuff out. How do you protect yourself? Back again to my harping on process. If you have a structure and you're using an apples to apples comparison mechanism and you're consistent in the way you hire, you can consistently guard against, but not perfectly rule out, the injection of bias in the process. And I think it's important to candidates to say what you stand for. So write an equal opportunity employment statement that in your own, I would advocate in your own language. Don't just go grab some random legalese. Talk about what kind of company you are and where you stand on these sorts of issues. And then the last question on a job application is my favorite. And I came across this technique a number of years ago, and I don't know, maybe this is a reflection on the quality of job applications in general, but at the end, this is a literal question that we put on our job application. Do you have a joke, or can you share something interesting? And you wouldn't believe the responses I get. Oh my gosh, I am so glad I asked this question because some of the responses are like, no, do not go there, right? I have gotten some very off-color jokes, and it's like, come on, dude, do you not get you're applying for a job? Pretend you're talking to a business associate, not your buddy after 3 beers, right? Or never, because some of the, literally I've gotten some stuff that it's like, oh, internet troll. So it's bad. Anyway, I've gotten political stuff. It's like, come on, like, you know, okay, I get it. I respect your opinion, and you know, if we're sitting around having a coffee sometime, sure, I'll talk politics with you. But no, not when we're first meeting each other, not when we're talking about hiring you into a business that deals with clients and has to be occasionally sensitive to such issues. It's one of my favorite things. The purpose of a job application is tease out more information, get some personality, see how they write. Do they spend the time to fill it out? Sometimes I'll get 2 or 3 word responses to our questions. I hate those. But actually I like them because it's really clear to me then what kind of candidate this person is. If you can't be bothered to spend just a few minutes answering a few straightforward questions and type in reasonably full sentences, no thanks. So you've got your job posting. That shows some personality. It's aimed, as a marketing piece should be, on its audience. You've got a job application that teases out more information from your candidates. The next step in the process is to look at resumes. And for resumes, again, I try to be consistent because after a stack of 50 of them, your brain starts to crawl out of your skull and want to go watch Netflix. And so what I do is I do a little checklist. And I have next to my desk a little notepad, and I put down my little checklist so I kind of keep focused, and then I just cruise through them. We do get a lot of resumes when we post applications. This process is work intensive for you as a hiring manager, but I think the work is worth it. You know, if there are typos or there are obvious mistakes on a resume, I don't even keep scanning the document. In the bin it goes. Is it organized sensibly? If someone can't organize information well on a resume and follow certain industry standards in presenting that information to you, if they've decided to get super creative, well, you know, sometimes if you're hiring a designer, or we do a little game development at New Millennium, which is kind of a side project of mine, those are going to be resumes that are more creative. But typically speaking, for the kind of work that we do, if you can't present information in a standard and organized fashion, then you're probably not going to design a database in a way that users will find intuitive and appropriate. So is it organized reasonably? How about length? After page 2 of a resume, you're losing me big time. And if it goes on past that, you'd better have some amazing things to say. So is the candidate attuned to their audience? I think that's an important value that I look for when hiring. Job hopping. So you look at the dates of their job history. If they've moved from thing to thing to thing, keep an eye out for that. That's a red flag for me. That means that someone is either, you know, they're not sure what they want, or for whatever reason, there's some friction, or who knows what the story is. And I may not rule someone out. If they've got really great experience in this job hopping, I might ask them about it. It's hard to tease out, though, the difference between someone who is ambitious and climbing a career path that is impressive versus someone who is uncommitted or what have you. So that can be a challenging one to work through. I also look for, obviously, the skills and the keywords. With education, military experience. So one of the things that I've looked into, I didn't do a slide on this, but one of the things I've looked into is how do you hire folks with a military background? They can be, as stereotype would suggest, they can be disciplined and they can know how to do good work. So I think, and there's an opportunity to support people in that regard. So look for their education, look for their background, look for things that add more noteworthy details to a resume. Last thing I want to talk about a resume is, what are you asking a resume to do? One of the things I struggle with when hiring is when I first am introduced to a candidate, I start to imagine the decision of whether or not to hire them. That's not the decision at this stage. Don't ask too much of a resume in a job application. When you're looking at a resume in a job application, all you need to figure out is, do I want to talk to this person a little bit more? That's it. And so what that does is that lowers the threshold of what you're trying to wrestle with in your mind as you're looking at a job application and a resume, and you can get through it in a more focused manner. And sure, if you want to sort them into yes, no, maybe, great, do that. I tend to just be yes, no, and go forward. Job postings, again, their marketing piece. They're talking about why your company is special. Why do people want to work there? What's interesting about you guys? And why would this team be appealing to me as a candidate? Job applications, get some more information, more data before even looking at the resume. Resumes, use a consistent process. I think it's really important throughout this whole thing to do apples to apples comparisons of candidates, and that's defensible and you can practice. One of the things that's really important in life is how do you not suck at something? You practice, right? And the only way to practice is to have plays. You know, a football analogy is probably a good one here. You know, get your playbook, practice your plays, get good at it, and that way you can focus on the content of the evaluation with a candidate rather than trying to figure out how you're playing the game in the middle of it. Get some muscle memory in your recruiting process. If I've understood you rightly, what experience do I look for a FileMaker background? Really depends. If they've got just literally prior positions for FileMaker development, that stands out to me. Otherwise, a coding background, and I tend to prefer folks that come from the web world than the traditional C, C#, C++ world, or Java. So if they've done web development, if they've done JavaScript in particular stands out to me because there are some analogs there to scripting. So, and it really depends on if I have resources to train someone or not. There are cases, lots of times, when I'll see a candidate who strikes me as somehow interesting, and they may not be a good fit for this position. I'll still reach out and talk to them. And right out of the gate, I'll be like, hey, you're not getting this job, but I really wanted to talk to you. I want to connect on LinkedIn, and I want to stay in touch. Those have led to some of the best hires I've done. Those sort of, hey, you were interesting, but you didn't quite fit this position. Let's keep talking, because generally speaking, by the time they come back around and you're ready to hire them, you've got the resources to perhaps train them in FileMaker or what have you, or you can leave them with some homework. You can say, look, you know, you've only got a year of FileMaker experience. Call me when you're certified. You get over the certification hump, and I'll talk to you. So I plant some seeds. It's not a perfect answer, but that's the way I tackle it. All right, so quick assessments. Ironically, this is not going to be a quick part of my talk this morning. I'll spend a lot of time on what I call a quick assessment. So a quick assessment, the purpose, I talked about the purpose of a resume. The purpose of a resume is to figure out if you want to do that next step and talk to someone. Here you've decided to talk to them, and the purpose of this quick assessment is to figure out if you want to really go in depth. And again, you're not trying to decide if you're going to get married. You're trying to decide if you want to spend some more time with this candidate. I invert my requirements. I talked about how culture is the most important piece of the puzzle when doing recruiting, and then skills are obviously one of the harder things to sort of assess in this process. And mechanics, the nuts and bolts, are the easy one. I start with the easy one, and there are two reasons for that. One, it gets the conversation going. This stuff is pretty straightforward. Why did you leave your last job? What kind of position are you looking for, full-time or contract? Do you want to live in Denver, or do you want to work remotely? These mechanics just get us talking. And it, to some degree, puts the candidate at ease. At least that's the theory. The other thing it does is it filters people out. If I'm hiring for a position that is in Denver or Boulder, then I can say, gosh, you look like a wonderful candidate. I'm so glad you applied. Let's stay in touch. It allows me to start to talk about some of their requirements. And this is a big deal for me. I believe that recruiting is a dialogue. You should be working together to figure out if you're a right fit for someone and if they're a right fit for you. Right? So what are you looking for in a team? What are you looking for in a manager? Where do you want to go in life? And so forth. The classic, like, where do you want to be in 5 years? Whatever. There are variations of that are more interesting. So get to know their requirements. This is a question I always ask in interviews in this quick assessment. If you had two job offers that are essentially the same compensation and circumstances, so they're both development positions, say, what would make you choose between the two of them? I love the answers I get from that, because that's when and sure, you get the standard resume, I'm looking for a challenge. Okay, well, what kind of challenge? What do you want to learn? In your career, as you're moving ahead, what is the FileMaker, say they're a developer position. What's the area of FileMaker you want to learn next? Do you want to learn server? Do you want to learn more about cloud? Do you want to, figure out how to write a script? I don't know. Anyway, you get some interesting stuff as you start to tease out what their requirements are, to encourage it strongly. And again, you can filter folks out. The other thing I do is I dive right into the money question. And literally, this is how I do it. I'll say, all right, well, we've talked a little bit about the qualitative side of things, what you're looking for, what we're looking for. We've hit some nuts and bolts. Quantitatively, what are you looking for compensation-wise? And I'll just sit and listen. And some folks are not prepared for that kind of a question so directly, so early on, but I think it's really important. The worst thing you can do to a candidate and to your business is to discover 2 weeks later, after you've done all these in-depth interviews, that they're expecting 200 grand and you're hoping for 20. We pay a little better than that, but anyway. So the other thing about compensation is, again, philosophically, I believe this whole thing should be a dialogue. I should be talking to someone about what you need, what experience do you bring to the table, what are you looking for, here's what we're looking for, and money's got to be in there. If you're skittish about money, don't do this, or better yet, practice getting comfortable with it. It's just a requirement. It's just one of many. Think of it as a feature in a database somewhere. How much money are we talking about? And if you can get to a range and so forth, oftentimes candidates will say, well, what range are you looking for? And somewhere they probably attended a seminar like this, and the speaker was like, don't say the number first, and whatever. You got to carve through that and just say, hey, look, I'm not trying to make this complicated, and I'll keep the thumb screws in my desk drawer. What I'd like to get a sense of, it depends, is our range, right? We can tailor positions to the person. So what's going to be fair to you and your family? Please, you've got a question.
I was recently hiring for a position, and usually I don't expect to discuss this, at least until I have the person face to face in front of me.
Interesting.
But I had somebody, all we did was say, would you like to come in to interview? And his very first question was, well, how much does the job pay?
Sure.
And I and everybody on my team felt like that was, inappropriate, something that you just don't do.
Huh.
But this guy not only, insisted on knowing this, but then started citing all kinds of obscure California state law stuff about disclosing, And so, we actually brought him in to interview just so that he wouldn't become litigious.
Oh my goodness. Okay, yeah, so you maybe made the right call there, but who knows? I think in your case, there was a culture mismatch there. He was, being sort of aggressive about it. But I will say I like to just straight up, let's talk about money, because getting paid is part of why we do all this, right? I mean, we hope it's more than that, but it starts with that. I'm not going to take a job that doesn't support me and my family. I'm just not. And so let's just be straight about that together. So in your case, I would say, you dodged a bullet there perhaps. But I get the intent behind it, I suppose. It's how you handle the discussion that's important.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Is that helpful?
Yeah, I think so. I guess my real question is the paradigm, do you think the paradigm has shifted on that over the years? Because throughout most of my career, every job I ever applied for, that never came up as a question.
Yeah. That's an awesome question.
Until fairly far along in the process, at least until you'd met face to face, and usually not until maybe a second interview when you were, maybe going to get hired. Yeah,
thanks for giving me a second crack at the response. That's a great question.
I didn't really explain it well.
No. So I think that absolutely the hiring world has shifted out from under our feet completely as employers. We don't have all the power. LinkedIn and Glassdoor and Salary.com, candidates have access to all the job applications, all the job positions out there they want. The economy is strong right now. We and you are begging for people to come in and work for us, work with us. And I think that salary information is out there. Now, is it right? Is it accurate? You can debate that. I think there's some inflation out there, but candidates don't care and don't know. So being straight about it, I think, is the right answer. Being perhaps transparent about it is the right answer. Like, you have to, when you hire people and they come into your business, I operate as though everyone here knows what everybody is making. And if I'm treating folks fairly, then, and that includes candidates, if I'm just being straight with them and being fair with them about the realities of our business, there is a point at which I can't afford you. That's just reality. And there's a point at which this job doesn't make sense for you and your family. Let's hope those overlap. And if it doesn't overlap, let's figure that out right out of the gate. That's the theory.
Thanks.
And I found this, I will say, if I can soapbox on it a little, just one more minute. I found it really useful to get into this dialogue because it does set the tone. If you pull it off rightly, it sets the tone for the conversation. People know that you're trying to treat them fairly, that you respect the requirements, including financial, that they have for coming into a new position. So you mentioned face-to-face interviews. Get on video. I can't say this more strongly. Skype, GoToMeeting, whatever, use it. And require it of people. And this does two things. One, you see the person. Here's the crazy thing. I can tell tone better when I'm looking at someone. I don't know why. That's just true. So you get a better sense of it, and you get a better communication vibe going. And for what it's worth, as an aside, I advocate using video with clients as well. But that's me. The other thing that video does, just as you saw a moment ago, I had not quite set up my laptop to switch over to Recruiter Box and back. Thanks for letting me fiddle with my machine for a moment. If you spend the first 15 minutes of a 30-minute interview fiddling with, someone's audio, you're dealing with someone who either didn't prepare for the interview or is kind of all thumbs when it comes to technology. That's another data point that's worth getting. Speaking of data, I want to encourage, so at the end of a quick assessment, I'll talk to a candidate, I'll go through those mechanics, I'll tease out some of their qualitative requirements. I'll figure out the compensation thing. Then at the end of it, I'll decide in my head, okay, am I sure I want to move forward with this person? Then I'll take them to the next step. Or I'll park it and I'll say, hey, we'll follow up with you later. But the follow-up is to get more information. And again, all I've invested in this process so far is a minute or two on their resume and a 20 to 30-minute phone call. The predictive index, there are a lot of behavior mechanisms out there, personality assessments, Myers-Briggs, and so forth. I really advocate for a predictive index, again, for two reasons. I seem to have two reasons for everything. So predictive index, it's quick. It takes a recipient of this thing about 10 minutes to fill out, and it does word pairs. So, what describes you best? Are you, this or that or what have you? You just go down the list, choose the words, hit save, and it's off. And then there's an analysis that shows up in your inbox as a hiring manager. This can be really insightful, and it's not so much about personality. What is the general makeup of this human, and how do they operate? And we've done in 30 seconds this in-depth psychology profile. No, that's not what it is. It's a behavioral index. It talks about how does this person communicate, and how do they make decisions. And the other nice thing that predictive index does is what you can do is you can sit down with your team. We haven't done this yet at New Millennium, but we're headed this way. You can sit down with your team and you can do a profile map of what a position requires. And so in the case, say, of a salesperson, I need somebody who's probably extroverted, probably high on the dominance scale. Patience, not so important in a salesperson. In fact, I think patience is probably a detractor in that case. So I want someone who's a low C. And then formality, probably somewhere in the middle. I want somebody who will follow process, but also is a creative thinker. So once I have that profile, and then someone fills out their predictive index, I can map it. And again, this is a data point. It's just information. It takes them 10 minutes, you read a report. But it's useful in terms of really getting a full picture of someone from a variety of angles. The other thing is references. I used to think references were largely irrelevant. Anyone can get their mom and two other people to say nice things about them. I don't know, maybe your family's different than my mom thinks I walk on water. She's wrong. So references. I used to think that it was no big deal. I now really advocate for getting references early. So at the end of that first phone call, ask for references. And again, you'll learn two things. This is the two things talk, I guess. You'll learn two things. One, how do they handle just the mechanism of getting you the references? Do they follow up in a week and a half? Well, that says something. That tells me no thanks, right? Week and a half. Or if they're really prompt and they've got a well-composed email that goes out to their references, great, awesome. And then talk to those references. And you can spread it out. You can ask some of your team members to speak to references and then get back to you or whatever. You can pick one or two. But usually a reference check will then prompt further questions that I have for the candidate, which I can bring to other interviews. Give data. So have a job description, a more complete job description for the person. Show that as a company you're on the ball. You can create a couple PDFs that just say, hey, what is it to work for New Millennium? Here you go. We've talked about a quick assessment. The purpose of a quick assessment is to decide if I want to invest further in this process. And I've filtered out some of the candidates' red flags, like if their compensation expectations are wrong or they want different location or what have you. It varies. So the in-depth assessment is where you really start to dig in to their both technical skills and can they deliver the goods. And this is a hard part to assess. Let me spend just 1 second on sort of the crazy, hey, let's pin someone down and shine the spotlights on them and ask them really, like, solve pi to 18 digits, go. I think those are absurd interview techniques. I don't want my teammates working under stress. I don't want them afraid while they're trying to do their best work. I want them to be supported and comfortable. Yes, clients, in our case, we're a service business, clients can be stressful at times, but I want to see what someone does when they're supported. What are they capable of? And I think an interview that's just like, let's light this person's hair on fire and see what happens, it's not useful, right? And it's mean. I don't believe in being mean. The heck with that. So anyway, so the in-depth assessment. Here, I'm not going to be quite as prescriptive. I've got an approach, but it really depends a lot on your position, on what you're hiring for. You know, for a project manager, for example, an in-depth assessment. Walk me through the differences between agile project management techniques and waterfall project management techniques. Can you use tools like Atlassian's tools, Jira and Confluence, or whatever you use for project management. If you don't use something for project management, that's another session. For a developer, what we'll often do is one of two things or both. We'll ask them to come to a call and do a code review of some work that they've done. And we'll walk through that code together and ask questions in an ad hoc, improvisational sort of way. We'll also send them an exercise. And I always ask for permission. I say, hey, you know, we've just finished the quick assessment. Hey, can I send you an exercise? It'll take a couple hours to work on. And that helps me see if the person is committed to the process. And the exercise for us often is, you know, a few paragraphs of requirements and build a little tool or a little something that does this. Or we'll send them the start of a FileMaker file that has some, you know, scripting errors, or maybe we've only half finished the script and ask them to finish it, that kind of thing. And then we use it as material to talk to them about it. So we'll fire up a screen share and we'll go through it together. It really does vary based on position. But I want to advocate for one thing in this in-depth stage is use a real-world scenario. And this, I can't advocate more strongly for it. The other day, we were interviewing for a developer position. We happen to be working with a client right now who is paper-based in their production process. And we're introducing iPads and barcode scanning to their production process. The whole reason for building this system with them is to reduce the time that it takes in seconds to manufacture their parts. Well, if we've got an interface that's going to add seconds, that's defeating the purpose. So I've been really wrestling with what should this interface do? How should it be? And is the iPad the right mechanism for it, or do we want to go to barcode scanners? This problem, this business problem, is really fresh in my mind. I've been working on the requirements with a client for the past few weeks, so I didn't have to spend time in the interview inventing a hypothetical scenario. My brain was focused on the conversation, and the cool thing is, this is a great technique, it draws the other person out as well. When you start talking about, well, should the interface be this or that, I showed the person my wireframes, and we started talking about whether or not it was structured the right way. This person asked some questions about data model, and I was like, oh yeah, I hadn't thought of that. You get into a good dialogue, and actually I've taken some tidbits from these interviews and be like, all right, I'm putting that on the list. So it can be useful to you, but again, it gets both you and the candidate out of the hypothetical and out of the, you know, I'm responding to interview questions mode and into actually doing work together. The best way to see if you want to work with someone is to work with someone. Now you're on to team interviews. With team interviews, this is the point at which, if they've gone through this process, I've spent 20 or 30 minutes on a quick assessment. We've done some in-depth interviews, and in some cases, I'll be the one conducting the in-depth interview, or it'll be another team member. I try to have it be a peer. Oftentimes it's not me, it'll be, you know, someone like Aaron doing a development review or what have you. I like to get a peer going because, again, that lowers that thumb screw, you're in an interview spotlight vibe. All right, so that's the in-depth. Then when it comes to team interviews, this is where I start to try to tease out culture. And I would love to tell you all that I've come up with this magic fairy dust that can tell you if someone is on time to work and a good communicator and ethical and has solid maturity. Obviously, in my case, an exception was made, but we'll worry about that later, and so forth. I have found with culture, the best thing to do is shut up and listen. And so what I do is I set up scenarios where we have some one-on-ones, and I'm always careful to make sure it's a peer. So we do a one-on-one, and we don't structure it so much. I say just get to know the person, listen to them, see what questions they have, and so forth. The other piece of the puzzle there is you have an opportunity at the team interview stage to sell your business. And I think it's important to identify a person on your hiring team and make them the point person for, hey, and my team will tell you this, I do this explicitly. I'm like, all right, you're on deck to sell the company. You're on deck to say what it is to work for New Millennium, and is that Scott guy reasonable or not, and please lie, so forth. You need somebody on your team who's going to evangelize. Not in a sort of a inappropriate way, but again, you're trying to give that candidate all the information you can. The other thing I do is I try to set up a group gathering of sorts. I'll take someone out for coffee, take them out for lunch if they're local. Online is a lot harder. Sometimes, I don't do this always because it really is kind of a contrived thing and it depends on people's schedules, but you get people in a group video session. And again, what you do is you just try to get to know the person. I will often go into those meetings with questions not for the candidate, but for my teammates. And I'll throw a few questions out there and try to get a conversation going. And then I just listen, and I see how the candidate responds. I find that a useful way to go. At this point, I've really probably made my decision as to whether or not I think an offer is in the making, but I really do want to get that feedback and that, hey, wait a minute, have you thought about this reaction from the team? It's a good way, again, to guard against those gut checks. So you've gone through. The job posting is your advertisement, drawing in good candidates. Job application gets you more information before you see a resume. You use a consistent process to look at a resume, so you're remembering, oh yeah, did I think about that? Did I think about this? A quick assessment. You start with mechanics. You figure out qualitatively what they're looking for. You introduce the idea that this is a dialogue. And then you weed out some folks that just in black and white terms are not a good fit. The quick assessment then leads to potentially getting more information, predictive index or personality test. And then you also set the stage for your in-depth conversation where you can ask permission to send them an exercise and see if they'll invest more time in the effort. A team interview gives you a chance to listen and let the other folks of your company do the talking, answer questions. I think it's really important to give candidates an opportunity to ask lots of questions along the way. Now it's time for an offer. And this is pretty easy because you've already talked about money way in the beginning. You've set the stage for all this. At this point, this should be a pretty simple, straightforward thing. I always give offers verbally, so I hop on the phone or I do video, and I'm like, I want to offer you a job. Here are the details. I don't belabor it, by the way. I hate that, reality TV show reveal after the commercial. So I'm like, hey, I want to hire you. This is the compensation. I'd love for you to start right away. Here's a little bit of, discussion of benefits or what have you, but it's pretty quick, and then I just listen. What are you thinking? Does this work? And sometimes I'll get a yes right out of the gate, and it's a 5-minute phone call. Love those. Sometimes it warrants a discussion, a little bit of back and forth. But again, the whole idea is let's just talk about it and figure it out together. And then I'd encourage you to follow up immediately with paperwork and offer letter. You should have an offer letter in your outbox ready to go when you get off that call, and boom, you're done. Get the offer letter right out the door, and that way you can show that you are interested and you're committed and you're on your game as a candidate decides formally to join your team. Onboarding. I've got just a few minutes, so I'm going to cruise through this real quick. Recruiting for me does not end at the offer letter or at the offer being accepted. And I really want to, as strongly as I can, advocate for this practice. Recruiting ends 3 months later. And what you do in those 3 months, and it's not binary. You're not, yes, I call it a probationary period. And for those folks who are really not a fit, you set the stage. You're straight with people. It's in the offer letter. The first 90 days is a probationary period. And if it turns out that we've made a mistake by choosing to work together, we can disentangle that to some degree. It's painful, and you second guess yourself, and there are all kinds of reasons why it's not that simple. But at least you've gotten out in those cases where you make the wrong call. And you give the candidate an out. As they come into the organization and they're like, whoa, you did not represent yourself. Anyway, you get some of that a little bit from time to time as well, where someone recognizes it's not a fit. Anyway, the other thing that the 90-day probationary period gives you, though, is, again, it's not binary. I say this again explicitly to the folks coming in. I want to tailor the position to you and your talents. I want to get to know you. I want us to land on what your talents and what you're good at can do for the organization. And so at the end of that period, I think it's good to revisit the job description and to sit down together and say, all right, now that we've gotten to know each other, now that you've gotten to know the business, let's dial in this job description. We started generic, now we can get specific for you. Put the person's name on it. And I'm like, okay, this is Dave's job description or what have you. I assign a buddy so that in addition to a manager, they've got somebody they can go to ask questions and get oriented. And I also ask them to help the next person who comes on board. And this, again, it gives me a sense of like, is this person thinking holistically in terms of benefiting the health of the organization? Hey, can you, if we gave you your email credentials but didn't give you a server address. Oh, that should be documented somewhere. Little things like that. Or, where do you find the coffee or what have you? Sure. But also bigger things. What is the process by which you develop software? And is that well documented internally or what have you? It could be any number of things. I just ask people in those first 90 days to use their fresh pair of eyes to help improve things. And then finally, I aim for the end in mind. I think about, okay, someday on down the road, I want your departure from this company to feel like a graduation. I believe in beginnings and endings, and you can set the stage in the beginning for that day when it's a celebratory thing, when someone moves on, or, I hope that they all, of course, retire from New Millennium happy and wealthy and so forth. But tonally, I think you have an opportunity to set the stage when you bring someone on board. Last word. I talked about giving you a blueprint. I hope I've successfully done that. Regardless of whether or not that blueprint fits for you, please use one. This is really about process, and this whole sort of conversation for an hour has been about adopting a good process that you can repeat and practice and get good at. That's my shtick. Thanks.